can I just say this is very strange to do this with you all without actually being with you? And I say that, and I am marking your I'm commending you all for doing this over all this time in this very, very strange way. So I just gave you a lot of information, and I'm wondering what questions or things people are wondering, thinking about.
Mother Sarah, I have a question about Form 2 at the top of page
Mm-hmm.
449.
Yep.
It says the priest and the penitent begin as follows. If I'm reading that correctly, they are reciting that together.
Correct.
And that seems like a beautiful coming alongside. It's like I am as imperfect as you, and I'm joining you in this rite in a way.
Right.
It seems very pastoral. I mean, it's just really kind of cool.
It is, right? You are confessing to a fellow sinner, right? And in fact, where is it? I'm forgetting where it is. The end of rite. The first form on 448, when the priest gives the dismissal, it's go in peace and pray for me, a sinner.
Yeah. So I'm very struck by the second form.
Mm-hmm.
It's much richer than the ritual, so to speak, in the Catholic Church. Although I think today, I think they do things somewhat differently, and also I think that they do provide a form closer to the Anglican Church, where people confess as a group and are forgiven as a group, and that's something also I very much value as part of the Anglican or Episcopalian ceremony. I'm also struck by your words brought back to me the fourth and fifth steps of the AA program, because they're very much aligned with the whole idea of the forgiveness, of getting rid of sin, of getting rid of the evil in your life.
Right. And with that, Tom, I think I got stuck on trying to say this earlier, that while there can be all of that sort of, a lot of emotional turmoil stuff sometimes comes up in the process of preparing, that you do not realize the weight of what you have been carrying until it has been confessed.
Yeah.
And the sense of relief and joy that comes with that is immense, because sometimes there's the thing itself, whatever this sin of omission or commission that I did, but then there's the guilt, the remorse, there's like all those pieces around it that are part of the burden that is born in addition to whatever the thing was itself. And the relief that comes can sometimes be quite astounding, and we don't realize how burdensome those things are until we've had the chance to confess them. Yeah.
Yeah, very much. Have you ever been to the Southern Baptist? I spent a lot of time in Southern Baptist churches because I married the daughter of a Baptist pastor.
Mm-hmm.
And so whenever we would visit with them, we would go to their church, and they're very much centered on the whole thing of forgiveness, and it's very moving. Their approach to this, it's extremely moving, and the whole catharsis of forgiveness, the feeling of being forgiven, getting rid of the guilt, dealing with the guilt, is just extremely powerful.
I'm not familiar with that, Tom. I will say I'm a cradle Episcopalian. There don't seem to be too many in the group at the moment, but I am. But I do want to say that in my own practice of making of receiving the rite, I've usually done it with monastic communities where a priest who serves a particular monastic community. So when I lived in Connecticut, there was a community of Episcopal religious women, the Sisters of St. Margaret, that are in Boston. And I would make retreat regularly with the sisters, and one of the priests there would hear my confession. And then since I've been here, I usually go down to make retreat in Whitethorn at the Redwoods Abbey that's down there, and usually with the priest that serves that community. And so the first incident is doing confession in the context of of an Episcopal community, the other is Catholic. And my experience of doing it at the monastery here is, you know, the old vision of confessionals and the little screens and all of that, like it's not part of my experience, at least now, of making confession when I've done it in the Catholic Church, that it's two people sitting face to face, and not that old image of going to the confessional on Saturday morning in preparation for Sunday. Not that there's anything inherently wrong with that, but I think it has changed in the Catholic tradition as well, in terms of how the space people are in and how that actually works.
I do have a concern though,
Mm-hmm.
with doing reconciliation in a church setting.
Mm-hmm.
Because usually the people who I'm going to be doing reconciliation with, I think of them as being somewhat of a more higher moral character than I am. I'm kind of shady in the past, so I'm just kind of worried about when I do confess. How can I say this? Done some shady stuff in my past, and you might not think of me the same way afterwards. So I don't know.
And I think, Marie, that's one of those pieces you have to work through in the that's part of the preparation, you know. Um, I don't know Daniel's past, so I can't speak to it. There may be something more.
Not shady. I don't think he's shady either.
No, I don't. I'm not aware of shade or scandal there. I don't know, but that actually isn't the point, right?
Yeah, I know.
Because when it gets down to us, every single one of us knows alienation, knows brokenness in some capacity. What it looks like for you is going to be different for me, but it doesn't mean I haven't had my own experience of brokenness, Ray. And that is the piece that Gail hit on with that opening part of Form 2 and is there at the end of Form 1. This is a fellow sinner. I'm going to read to you all something very briefly from Barbara's book about the why of looking at the language you use around this is important and not abandoning the language. This is very brief from the introduction. And it's part of the reason why I think utilizing this right is important. She says, abandoning the language of sin will not make sin go away. Human beings will continue to experience alienation, deformation, damnation, and death, no matter what we call them. Abandoning the language will simply leave us speechless before them and increase our denial of their presence in our lives. Ironically, it also weakens the language of grace, since the full impact of forgiveness cannot be felt apart from the full impact of what has been forgiven. Shadiness, Marie, sounds to me like a judgment on your experience.
Yeah.
And as she says, we all know experiences of damnation, of alienation, of all of those things. We don't get exempt from that. That's part of our human condition. And it's, you know, what it looks like for Gail, what it looks like for Steve, what it looks like for Father Daniel, what it looks like for Destiny, like it's different for all of us, but we all have known it in some way. And I think perhaps maybe you all have hit on something, that while the presumption is that a priest hears this, and priests are set apart in our tradition to, this is part of the role that we have to offer absolution on behalf of God and the community. You're not talking to a human being who is somehow fundamentally a different category of human being than you are. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Steve.
Briefly speaking to the Baptist experience as a Baptist and a Baptist minister, congregational confessions can be interesting, not always edifying. I've been in situations where there was almost a one-upmanship going on.
Right.
The other thing I wanted to say to Marie was that, and never having myself participated in the rite of reconciliation, but been in analogous situations from both sides, in the process of preparing, in the process of examining, you may find that some things you thought were sin were not,
Right.
and that other things you did not think were sin were.
Right.
And that deep examination can be an intense experience.
Yes. One of the things that that I appreciate about the second resource that I mentioned to you, and in a moment I'll put both of them up on the screen, is that particular to that is that there's a piece where he reflects, and Martin Smith has been a spiritual director. He was for a number of years the superior of the Society of St. John the Evangelist, which is a Episcopal community of religious men in Cambridge, Massachusetts. But his long experience, I think, particularly of spiritual direction, of noting, he has some pastoral notes for women in particular, although it's worth men looking at them as well, because in his experience, the way that sometimes sin gets expressed in the life of men and women is different because of some of the ways we are taught, some of the gendered pieces, right, around power over versus not asserting one's power, that then comes up for women around a lot of anger and resentment, et cetera, sometimes. And I don't want to sidetrack us on that, but Steve, your point is well taken, that can come as a surprise to us, right? That what we thought was sin isn't, and what we never paid attention to or hardly noticed is like, oh. Yeah.
Yeah, can I just follow
Please
that?
do, Daniel.
That's a really good point, Stephen. Reminds me of Judas Iscariot, who we think is, Dante put him in the inner circle of hell, and we associate his sin as betraying Jesus with a kiss, nevertheless. But that was a sin, and that could have been forgiven. The sin that really led to his suicide and maybe his place in hell is the sin of despair, which is the refusal to accept forgiveness, the refusal to ask and then forgive oneself. So I appreciate what you said, Mother Sara, about the judgment we place on ourselves. Sometimes this real sin is not what I said or failed to say or said in a way that I wasn't happy with. That wasn't the sin. That's just me being scrupulous. And the real sin might be the level in which I judge myself and am so maybe even self-loathing. That might be the real sin, and that can be extremely liberating for the penitent, and shift like, okay, this is actually what I need to be focusing on, not on being this perfect person that I think the church expects me to be. It's actually being more gentle with myself, and that's a huge invitation that I experienced that really brought me to the Episcopal Church. And that was one of my favorite things, and is one of my favorite things about being a priest. And when I was a chaplain at the General Hospital in San Francisco, and one of my favorite things was telling people, you are forgiven. And I could see the weight falling off them, and they were shocked that, like, really? I'm forgiven and God loves me even after all this stuff I've done? Yes. And that's what I love so much about this. I've only done this a handful of times. I think a lot of people aren't aware of it, and it does require a lot of preparation, as Mother Sara said. But I've seen people change their whole demeanor after pronouncing this absolution. So thank you for this powerful invitation. I want to let you say some more, but I also just want to say that this is a great invitation into Lent, I'm looking at the Ash Wednesday words at the beginning of the service. Lent is a season to prepare for devotion and celebration of the Lord's passion and resurrection. Prepare in a season of penitence and fasting, and it's provided a time in which converts to the faith were prepared for holy baptism. So I'm thinking about those who are interested in baptism. Lent is a time to enter more fully into that. And then let me just add this one question that came up. I think Stephen asked this, and it's a tricky one. That brings up the tension between church and state. What happens if someone says, my sin that I'm confessing is actually, I'm still doing it, and it's abusive, like for instance, maybe it's sexual abuse towards a minor. What does a priest do in that situation? I've never been put in that situation. But that's, I mean, what I said was, well, I would most likely withhold absolution and say, you need to stop this right away. But where's the accountability there? So I'm wondering, Sarah, if, since you've done more in-depth study on this, how you might respond to something like that.
I think there would be several parts to that, Daniel. One is, okay, is there been a crime committed? If so, has it been reported? And if not, then that needs to happen. Number two is, depending on the person's, living situation, etc., is there someone who is in danger of being victimized, and well, say assuring that that's not going to happen, but that could require some fairly significant change that needs to happen then, as well as walking with that person to get the help that is needed. I'm not being articulated about this, but I'm actually wondering about Karen weighing in a little bit on that, in terms of her therapeutic piece. There's sort of the, like, has something happened and that needs to be reported, dealing with, is there likelihood of imminent danger to someone, responding to that piece, and then the third piece is sort of the going forward from there, right? And so a piece of this being not just, you confess and you're absolved and that's done. It's like it's this piece about walking alongside with people, right? And that this happens in the context of a community. If, say, I don't know, see if this was behind your question or not. Churches have found ways to, if it becomes known to clergy that, say, someone is a registered sex offender, right, comes new to a congregation, and they share that in the context of confession or not, but they make that known, how the community navigates that so that the person can be part of the community, but people are also not put in harm at risk, right? That's a little bit divergent from what you asked, Daniel, but that's kind of my on the spot. I haven't had to deal with that particular concern in the context of sacramental confession, but it feels like there's kind of three pieces to it, right?
Thank you.
What has happened to kind of dealing with what may happen in the more present moment, and then sort of the longer term trajectory for that person.
I do have a question about that. You know, as a psychologist, I was a mandated reporter. My husband, Dan, in a non-sacramental church, was a mandated reporter because confession isn't part of the rite of the church.
Right.
You, as Episcopal priests, I think are seen differently because it is a rite of the church. Are you a mandated reporter if someone comes to you? And you are? Okay. So, I mean, that's the legal piece. And for me, it was always really important in my initial informed consent to say, if you come to me and what you're doing, you tell me that what you're doing is abusing a child, I have to report it. I don't have a choice. I will not abandon you if that's the case. I will work it through with you. I'll be in the room when you call. If you want to report it, this is something that can heal, but I have to report it. And I found, because I was in that circumstance a number of times, that it was actually every single time it was freeing for the patient. It was something they realized they were saying in the context of this will be reported, and it actually led to good. I mean, it was difficult, and in some cases it even, you know, it led to some harsh consequences, but confession can be really liberating. But there is that legal piece where we don't have a choice, right?
Right.
We
Correct.
just don't have a choice. And there is, as you've already said, you know, there is a more integrated, authentic life beyond it possible.
Right. Steve.
Well, besides the clergy's conundrum, if they're in that situation, and they may choose under guidance or not to suffer the consequences of not reporting, but the legal consequences. But I think I'm hearing from Karen and my own experience, although it's never dealt with children, and what I'm hearing otherwise is the walking with is the important thing. Because unless somebody is just so broken and calloused that they can't be reached, I think most people in that kind of situation, as a, if you will, perpetrator, actually long for the walking with. You know, we're meant to be in community, not in isolation. We're built that way.
Right.
And I think sacramentally as well as psychologically, extending that in a sincere way probably holds great promise.
Well, in our earlier conversation, we were getting to the fact that there is such a thing as sin against oneself, right? But by and large, the sin we're involved with involves other people, right? And so the healing, the amendment of life is going to, by necessity, involve other people, whether that's the person involved in a particular situation or it's just the need of the community to support us in going forward.
This is a statement by way of a question, and it's this. We have to put an end to the proximity. You have to get out of that house if the two of you are living together. Somebody has to leave. And then we deal with the absolution question. That's a question that I'm putting forward.
And I just wanted to suggest that we can't do it now for time, but we haven't defined sin. We haven't defined sin.
Missing the mark, I heard.
In terms of confession,
right?
Whether we're talking acts or state or attitude, but back to Tom's question.
Yeah, and I'm glad we delved into that. I do want to respect the time because we've gotten 28 minutes over. I will just say I did mention at least sort of a very broad general definition of sin way a year ago now in March. We disconnecting from God and ourselves and each other and the church and religion. Remember, religion is about reconnecting, and this is one way to do that. And I think when somebody does come to confession and says something like I'm an abuser in a relationship, I believe and hope that they're at that point ready to start facing the consequences. That's the hope. And so again, this was amazing, Sarah. I really appreciate this, and this is an invitation to all of you to consider this. And yes, I will not be offended if you go to talk to Sarah. Yeah. And we have other clergy that are qualified to do this. Mother Nancy, Father David Shoemaker, Mother Leslie, Mother Jerry at St. Francis Fortuna. They're all qualified to do this. Even deacons, even though it's slightly different, as you can see. Mm-hmm. Was there anything else you want to say, Sarah, before we bring this to an end?
I don't think so. As with a number of things, sometimes we have to hear or be introduced to things several times before we're ready to actually take it on and move forward with it. But I commend it, not simply because it's there, but because it really is a means for renewal. If what we're interested in and hoping for is renewal of our life with God, this is an important piece in that. And I wanted to unpack it a little bit because I don't want people to be scared because of some experience they had years ago or misconceptions about what it might be like. And of course, Daniel and I are available for more conversation if people are really ready to start thinking about this.
Have you done it over Zoom, Sarah?
No.
Yeah.
No, I can't.
I think it'd be better to do it in person.
Yeah.
And we can do that. We can certainly do that.
Yeah.
Okay, that was it. So remember, next week, 12:30. Try to come a little earlier, so we don't keep the bishop waiting. Okay? Sarah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Blessings to you
Thanks
all.
very much. Thank you.
Enjoy the Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
Puppy bowl.
Puppy Bowl.